camera that captures the moment of a subject's death. The estate sale wasn't marked on my map, and I wasn't supposed to be there. A wrong turn had brought me to a crumbling Victorian house, its spindly frame reaching into the misty night like bony fingers. A single flickering light hung over the door, and a handwritten sign read, "Estate sale tonight." I hesitated on the porch, the wood creaking underfoot, but curiosity won. The door swung open with a shriek, revealing a cluttered maze of antique furniture, cobwebbed chandeliers, and shelves crammed with peculiar odds and ends. A musty scent, aged wood and forgotten memories, clung to the air. The small crowd inside moved with a sluggish rhythm, their murmured voices blending with the faint crackle of an ancient radio. The house felt alive, its walls seeming to shift subtly when I turned my back. I kept my focus straight ahead, unwilling to linger too long in any one spot. That's when I saw it. Nestled among stacks of yellowed books and rusted tools, the camera gleamed like a jewel. Its brass body caught the dim light, every detail precise and polished. It was a boxy contraption, with a lever on the side and a lens that seemed to peer back at me, its glossy surface too vivid, too alive. Quite a find, isn't it? The voice startled me. I turned to face a man hunched behind the counter, his eyes clouded and his lips drawn into a taut smile. "It's beautiful," I replied, brushing my fingers over its cool surface. The man's smile faltered. "You should know, it's peculiar. Belonged to a photographer with a reputation. Took pictures of things best left unseen, or so the story goes. Thought I should mention it." I laughed nervously, dismissing his cryptic warning as the usual theatrics of estate sales. "How much?" He named a price far lower than I'd expected, as if he wanted it gone. I handed over the cash and tucked the camera into my bag, trying to shake the feeling of the man's eyes boring into my back as I left. The walk home was uneventful, but the silence was unnerving. My footsteps sounded too loud on the empty street, and the mist seemed to thicken, muffling even the distant hum of traffic. By the time I reached my apartment, my chest felt tight, as though I'd been holding my breath. The camera sat on my desk like a relic from another time. I couldn't resist the urge to examine it further. Every detail was immaculate. The etched brass, the intricate carvings along its frame, the smooth motion of the shutter lever. It seemed almost too perfect, as though untouched by time. The lens stared at me, dark and reflective, and I felt a faint tremor of unease. Shaking it off, I loaded it with film I'd picked up from a thrift store weeks ago, eager to test its mechanics. What harm could a few photos do? The first photograph was innocuous. I pointed the camera at the vase of wilting daisies on my kitchen table and clicked the shutter. The mechanism whirred smoothly, and the faint smell of ozone filled the air. Satisfied, I moved to the window, aiming at the quiet street below. The camera felt heavier than before, as though reluctant to let me press the lever again. I developed the film in my tiny bathroom-turned-dark room, the dim red bulb casting eerie shadows. As the images began to form, I leaned in, eager to see the results. The daisies were sharp and vivid, each petal etched with precision. But the second photo, the street scene looked wrong. The quiet pavement was now splattered with dark stains. No, blood. A twisted shape lay crumpled on the ground, its features obscured but unmistakably human. My stomach churned. The street outside had been empty when I'd taken the shot. I chalked it up to a flaw in the film, a trick of the developing process. Still, the image nagged at me as I stood at the window, staring down at the empty street. The next day, I photographed a bird perched on the branch outside my apartment. It fluttered its wings, cocking its head as if aware of the lens. I developed the photo that evening, my breath catching as the image materialized. The bird was sprawled on the ground, its wings bent at unnatural angles, a thin trickle of red seeping into the concrete. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind, but I shook it off. Coincidences. Just coincidences. I took more photos, each one clawing deeper into my growing unease. A candid shot of my neighbor captured her mid-laugh, her coffee cup raised. In the developed print, the cup had shattered mid-air, scalding liquid splashing her face. Her body lay limp beneath a jagged shard of glass protruding from her chest. I stared at the image until my vision blurred, dread pooling in my gut. The photos were impossible, visions of events that hadn't happened. Not yet. The camera sat on my desk, its lens gleaming mockingly, daring me to pick it up again. Despite everything, I couldn't stop myself. My curiosity burned, fueled by equal parts fear and fascination. I turned the camera toward the mirror, my reflection staring back. Click. The shutter echoed in the room, a sound that seemed to reverberate too long, too deep. I lowered the camera, my hands trembling. Hours later, the photo developed in the faint red glow of the darkroom. My reflection stared back, unchanged, except for the jagged shards of glass erupting around me, crimson streaks blooming across my shirt. I dropped the photo, my heart hammering. The camera watched, unblinking, as I realized the truth. My time was running out. The photo of my reflection haunted me. I tried to shove it to the back of my mind, telling myself it was just an elaborate trick of light, a flaw in the film, anything to avoid the horrifying possibility that the camera's images foretold death. But the thought clung to me like a shadow. The next morning, I found the photo on my desk, though I was sure I'd thrown it into a drawer. My reflection stared back, the shards of glass impossibly sharp, the dark stains on my chest vivid enough to make my breath hitch. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something about the camera wasn't right. I decided to research its origin. The internet was an ocean of information, but every search for the camera's make and model led to dead ends. There were no records of its manufacturer, no mention of its unique brass design. I dug deeper, combing through forums on vintage photography. That's when I stumbled upon a post buried in an obscure thread about cursed artifacts. The user mentioned a camera matching mine exactly, a brass box with intricate carvings and a lens that seemed almost alive. The post described a chilling history. It had belonged to a reclusive photographer in the 1920s, a man named Elias Vorst. According to the lore, Vorst's work became infamous not for its artistic merit, but for its eerie accuracy in predicting the deaths of his subjects. He was said to have vanished, leaving behind only the camera. As I read on, a strange sensation crept over me, as if the air in the room had thickened. My heartbeat drummed in my ears when I reached the final line of the post. It said the camera doesn't just capture death, it accelerates it. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing. The room felt colder, darker. I glanced at the camera, still sitting on my desk, its lens gleaming faintly in the dim light. I knew I needed to get rid of it. Grabbing the camera, I stuffed it into a bag and headed for the pawn shop down the street. The shopkeeper took one look at it and stepped back, shaking his head. "Not here," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "That thing, you take it somewhere else." It didn't matter where I went. Every shop owner, every dealer refused to touch it. I even tried leaving it on a park bench, but when I returned home, it was there, sitting on my desk like it had never left. Panic gripped me as I stared at it. I thought about smashing it, but something inside me hesitated, a gnawing sense that breaking it might release something worse. The camera seemed to hum faintly, a sound too low to be real. It wasn't going to let me go. Desperation drove me to seek answers elsewhere. I spent hours in the dusty corners of the city's library, combing through archives. Finally, I found a mention of Elias Vorst in a collection of old newspaper clippings. One article detailed a series of mysterious deaths surrounding Vorst's exhibitions. The photographer himself had claimed to have discovered a way to capture fate, though the specifics were never revealed. Another article, dated years later, reported his disappearance after a fire destroyed his studio. The camera was never found. But there was one final scrap of information, a reference to a ritual to sever the camera's power, buried in an old occult manuscript. The ritual required a confrontation with the camera's essence, and a choice that could only be made at the stroke of midnight. The article ended with a warning. Failure would bind the camera to its owner forever. Midnight was hours away, but I felt its approach like a tightening noose. The house was silent, save for the ticking of my wall clock, a sound I hadn't noticed before, but now seemed deafening. The ritual was simple in its instructions, but ominous in its implications. It required complete focus, the courage to face the camera's true nature, and the strength to sever its hold. Failure, the manuscript had warned, would mean losing not just my life, but my very essence to the camera. I prepared the room as instructed. A circle of salt surrounded my desk, a single candle flickered weakly, and the air felt electric with anticipation. The camera sat in the center, its brass surface gleaming malevolently. As the clock inched toward midnight, the air seemed to shift. Shadows crept along the walls, elongating unnaturally. The camera's lens gleamed brighter, almost pulsing in rhythm with my racing heart. The moment the clock struck 12, the candle sputtered, and the room plunged into near darkness. I whispered the incantation from the manuscript, my voice trembling. The camera's lens shifted. No, not shifted, turned, as if it were focusing on me. A low hum filled the room, rising in pitch until it became a deafening whine. The salt circle wavered, the grains scattering as an unseen force surged outward. Then, the images came. They flickered across the walls like projections, scenes of every photo I'd taken with the camera. The bird, my neighbor, even myself, each moment of death played out in vivid, gruesome detail. The images twisted and blurred, merging into something new. A figure emerged from the lens. Its shape was human, but its edges rippled like heat waves. Its face, if it could be called a face, was blank, save for two burning points of light where eyes should have been. It extended a hand toward me, and the room seemed to contract, the air thickening as if it were pulling me closer. "You must choose," a voice echoed, hollow and resonant. The choice burned in my mind. Destroy the camera and risk everything, or keep it and succumb to its curse. The figure loomed closer, the air around me crackling with energy. I clenched my fists, my decision made. At the last moment, I reached for the camera. The figure froze as my hand closed around the camera. Its form rippled violently, as though it were struggling to maintain cohesion, and the burning points of light in its face flared brighter. The room quaked with a deep, guttural hum that felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. "Your choice is made," the voice echoed, layered and hollow, reverberating through my skull. The camera grew heavier in my grasp, its brass surface unnaturally warm, almost searing to the touch. The lens moved again, this time focusing directly on me. My reflection shimmered within it, distorted and wrong. My features stretched and fragmented like glass about to shatter. Suddenly, the air around me erupted into motion. The images from the walls tore free, swirling into a vortex that surrounded me and the figure. Each snapshot was sharper now, the moments of death frozen in horrifying clarity. The bird's broken wings, my neighbor's lifeless form, and, most vividly, my own image reflected in shards of blood-streaked glass. I staggered back, clutching the camera. It pulsed in my hands like a living thing, the vibrations resonating deep within my chest. The figure extended its hand again, a claw-like shadow reaching toward me. "Break the lens," the voice commanded, colder and darker now, as if daring me to defy it. My instincts screamed at me to obey. But the camera, it was resisting, anchoring me with a pull that felt alive. Its weight doubled, then tripled, as if trying to weld itself to my hands. "No!" I shouted, my voice ragged. I gripped the camera tighter, summoning every ounce of strength as I raised it above my head. The figure recoiled slightly, the lights of its eyes flickering. For the first time, I felt something other than terror in its presence, hesitation. I brought the camera down hard on the edge of the desk. The lens shattered with a sound that was more than glass breaking. It was a wail, deep and resonant, a scream that vibrated through my bones. The vortex of images collapsed instantly, imploding into the camera. The figure let out an otherworldly howl, its form convulsing violently as cracks spiderwebbed across its body. The burning lights of its eyes dimmed, then extinguished, as it dissolved into the air like smoke in a strong wind. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. The room was dark save for the weak flicker of the candle. I looked down at the camera, now cracked and lifeless in my hands. Its brass shell was dull, its malevolence gone. But something wasn't right. The broken lens reflected my face again, fragmented and distorted. In the shards, I saw the shadow of the figure lingering, its faint outline flickering behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Still, the reflection remained. I staggered to the bathroom, my pulse pounding as I stood before the mirror. My reflection was whole, unbroken. But as I leaned closer, I saw them, those two pinpricks of light, faint but unmistakable, burning deep within my pupils. The room grew colder. My breath fogged the mirror, and in the condensation, words began to form, written by an unseen hand. "You are the lens now." My knees buckled, and I clutched the sink for support. The weight of the camera was gone, but the pull I had felt, the sinister gravity that bound it to me, was still there, burrowed deep within my chest. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling and gasping for breath. When I finally stepped away, the words had vanished, but their meaning lingered like a dark stain on my soul. The days since have passed in a haze. The camera sits in its place on the desk, its lens shattered, its body inert. I can't bring myself to throw it away, and I don't dare leave it behind. I see things now, in reflections, in shadows, in the corners of my vision, brief glimpses of events that haven't happened yet. They're sharper every day, clearer. And every time I close my eyes, I see those burning points of light, waiting, watching. I am the lens now, and my time is running out.